In all my years of sitting across from people in crisis, I've learned one simple truth. The problem they walk in with is almost never the real problem. It's just the ticket for admission. The presenting issue, the addiction, the rage, the betrayal, that's just a symptom of a much deeper wound. A wound that's been festering in the dark, usually for years. I saw that wound in a young woman named Jenna the second she walked onto my stage. The cameras don't always pick it up, but when you've looked into as many broken souls as I have, you learn to see past the noise. Her family saw a drug addict. Her parents, Mark and Susan, sat on the couch looking like they'd aged a decade in the last 2 years. Their faces were a roadmap of sleepless nights, fear, and a profound, bone-deep disappointment that only a parent can feel. They described their daughter as a liar, a thief, a ghost who haunted their home, stealing jewelry and prescription pads to feed a monster they didn't understand. The audience saw it too. They saw the track marks she tried to hide under long sleeves, the sallow skin, the defensive posture. She was a cliche, a walking PSA for the opioid crisis. And that's exactly what she wanted us to see. Because it was easier to be judged as a common junkie than to be seen for what she really was. A keeper of a secret so heavy it was crushing the life out of her. I'd read the pre-interview notes. The story was textbook, golden child, star athlete, straight A student. Then, halfway through her freshman year of college, a sudden and catastrophic collapse. She dropped out, came home, and the girl they knew vanished. She was replaced by this stranger who was sullen, secretive, and utterly consumed by a need for pills. The parents had a narrative, of course, they always do. It was a bad boyfriend, it was the pressure of school, it was a one-time party that got out of hand. They had a whole list of external villains to blame because it was too painful to consider that the enemy might have come from within, or worse, from somewhere they had failed to protect her. But I wasn't buying it. People don't just fall off a cliff for no reason. They get pushed or they jump. When I looked at Jenna, I didn't see a girl who had stumbled into addiction. I saw a girl who was running toward it. She was using the drugs not just to escape, but to self-destruct. There's a huge difference. Escapism is about avoiding pain. Self-destruction is about punishment. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a story about addiction. This was a story about shame. The kind of toxic, soul-eating shame that convinces you you're worthless, that you deserve every bad thing that happens to you. And my job in that moment was to find the source of that shame. It was buried deep, and she had built a fortress of lies and narcotics around it. But I knew it was in there, and I knew that if we didn't get to it, she was going to die. Not from an overdose, necessarily. She was going to die from the secret. The drugs would just be the delivery system. I remember starting the interview, going through the motions. Jenna, your parents say you've stolen over $50,000 from them. Is that true? She'd give me the standard answers, a shrug, a mumbled, I don't know, maybe. Her eyes were flat, defiant. She was performing the role of the unrepentant addict she thought we expected. Her mother would cry, her father would clench his jaw, and the whole tragic carousel would go around and around. But I kept watching her eyes. I was looking for a flicker, a crack in the facade. Because people can lie with their mouths, they can lie with their bodies, but the truth always lives in their eyes. It's waiting to be seen. I just had to ask the right question to let it out. We talked about the rehabs, 3 of them in 18 months. She'd go get clean for a few weeks and then relapse almost immediately upon coming home. Her parents saw it as failure. I saw it as a pattern. She wasn't failing at sobriety. She was succeeding at getting back to her drug, because her drug was the only thing that made the secret quiet. I turned to her parents, Mark and Susan. I could see their frustration. They came here for me to fix their drug-addicted daughter, and in their minds, that meant talking about the drugs, the stealing, the lies. They wanted me to give her an ultimatum to scare her straight. What they didn't understand is that you can't scare someone who is already living their worst fear every single day. Their approach was all about control. They'd tried tough love, they'd tried cutting her off, they'd tried pleading. It was a classic case of parents trying to manage the unmanageable, focusing all their energy on the symptom because the cause was too terrifying to contemplate. Mark, Susan, I said, looking them straight in the eye, everything you've been doing, every strategy you've tried has been focused on stopping the drug use. I get it. You're scared and you want the behavior to stop. But what you're doing is playing checkers, and this is a chess game. You're reacting to her moves, but you're not asking why she's making them in the first place. I let that sink in. I could see the confusion on their faces. They were good people, trapped in a nightmare, and they were trying to fight a monster in the dark with the lights off. I turned back to Jenna. Her arms were crossed tight against her chest, a physical barrier. Jenna, let's go back. Before all this, freshman year of college, you were on the dean's list your first semester. Your parents showed me the pictures. You were happy, you were thriving. Then comes second semester, and everything falls apart. What happened? Her answer was immediate, practiced. I don't know. I guess I just couldn't handle the pressure. I started partying too much. It was a good line, a plausible line, but it was a lie. It was a story she had told herself so many times it almost felt true, but it didn't account for the level of self-hatred I saw in her. People who party too much feel regret. People who hate themselves feel shame. There's a universe of difference between those two things. No, that's not it, I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. That's the headline. I want the story. You don't go from Dean's List to a full-blown opioid addiction in 3 months because of pressure. Something happened. There was a trigger, an event, a moment in time when you decided that you weren't worth it anymore. A moment when the pain of being you became greater than the fear of the drugs. I saw it then. The flicker. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A shadow passed over her eyes. The fortress wall had just been touched. She looked away toward the floor. Anywhere but at me. Her mother started to speak. We've asked her 100 times, Dr. Phil. She won't tell us. Because you're asking the wrong question, I interrupted gently but firmly. You're asking what happened as if you're investigators looking for a culprit. You need to be asking her how she felt. The event is just a fact. The feeling is the truth. I leaned forward. Jenna, I'm not the police. I'm not here to judge you or anyone else, but I can't help you fight a ghost. We have to give this thing a name. Was it a boy? Did you fail a class? Did someone betray you? I was casting a net, watching to see what she'd react to. The escalation at home made perfect sense in this context. When she came home from college, a ghost of her former self, her parents met her with fear and anger. They saw the failing grades, the lost scholarship, the vacant look in her eyes. So they did what frightened parents do. They clamped down, they gave her curfews, they took away her car, they searched her room. Every action they took intended to save her was sending her a clear message: we don't trust you. You are a problem to be managed. From Jenna's perspective, already drowning in a sea of self-loathing, Their actions were just confirmation of what she secretly believed to be true, that she was broken, dirty, and not worthy of trust or love. So she retreated further. The drugs became her only confidant. The needle became the only thing that didn't judge her. It just offered silence. The family home became a battlefield. Yelling matches in the kitchen. Doors slammed so hard the picture frames on the wall would rattle. Her mother finding burnt spoons and her father finding missing checks. It was a vicious cycle. The more they pushed and accused, the more she lied and used. The more she used, the more they had to push and accuse. They were all trapped in a dance of dysfunction, and the addiction was calling the tune. They thought they were fighting her addiction. What they were really doing was feeding the secret. They were creating the perfect environment for it to grow, to fester in the darkness of anger and mistrust. The tension on the stage was palpable. You could feel the years of anger and hurt radiating off them. Mark, her father, was a man who was used to being in control. He was a successful businessman, a problem solver, and here was a problem his own daughter that he couldn't solve, couldn't bully, and couldn't buy his way out of. That kind of powerlessness can make a man feel a lot like a failure, and when men like Mark feel like failures, they often get angry. It's a defense mechanism. He saw her addiction as a personal affront, a rebellion against everything he'd provided for her, a stain on the family name. I just don't understand it. Dr. Phil, he said, his voice tight with restrained fury. We gave her everything, the best schools, a car, anything she ever wanted. And this is how she repays us? By throwing it all away to be a common drug addict? There it was, that word repay. He saw their relationship as transactional. I give you a good life, you give me a successful, compliant daughter. And when she broke that contract, he didn't see a child in pain, he saw a bad investment. I'm not saying he didn't love her, he did. But his love was all tangled up in ego, in expectations, in what her life said about him. Susan, her mother, was different. Her pain was quieter, more corrosive. She was drowning in guilt. Where did we go wrong? She whispered, tears streaming down her face. Was I too easy on her? Did I not pay enough attention? It must be my fault. This is the mother's lament. They carry the weight of everything. If a child stumbles, the mother often feels she's the one who failed to build a solid foundation. Susan was blaming herself, and that blame made her passive. She'd plead with Jenna 1 minute and then enable her the next, slipping her $20, hoping it was for food, knowing deep down it was for drugs. She was caught between the fear of her husband's anger and the fear of her daughter's death. This was the dynamic Jenna came home to. An angry, judgmental father and a guilty, enabling mother. There was no safe harbor for her. There was no one she could tell the truth to, because she believed the truth would only confirm her father's worst fears about her and shatter her mother's idealized image of her completely. So she chose the drugs. The drugs were predictable. They never asked questions. They never looked at her with disappointment. They just offered a temporary oblivion. Jenna, I said, my voice low and direct, bringing the focus squarely back to her, look at me, forget about them for a minute. This is about you. I believe something happened to you at college that you have never told a single soul. I believe it was so traumatic, so shameful, that you made a decision that day. You decided that you would rather be a drug addict in the eyes of the world than be the girl that thing happened to. Because being a drug addict is a story you can control. You can own it. You can even use it as a weapon against the people who hurt you. But the secret owns you. She started to shake her head, the automatic denial reflex kicking in. No, it's not. It wasn't like that. Yes, it was, I insisted. I wasn't going to let her off the hook. Not now. We were too close. Addiction on this level with this much self-destruction is almost always a mask for trauma. Always. It's a symptom, not the disease. The disease is the secret you're carrying. The drugs are just the medication you're using to treat it. And let me tell you something, it's a lousy medication. It has side effects. It's going to kill you. But here's the kicker. It's never going to cure the disease. The only cure for a secret is the truth. I watched her breathing. It was shallow, rapid. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her arms. The audience was silent. Mark and Susan were leaning forward, hanging on every word. A glimmer of understanding finally dawning in their eyes. They were beginning to see that they hadn't been fighting a war on drugs. They'd been caught in the crossfire of a war Jenna was fighting against herself. What are you so afraid of, Jenna? I asked softly. What do you think will happen if you say it out loud right here, right now? Do you think the world will end? Do you think these lights will explode? Do you think I'll look at you differently? Do you think your parents will stop loving you? Her father spoke up, his voice cracking for the first time. Jenna, honey, there is nothing you could say that would make us stop loving you. And that was the moment. The dam broke. A single tear escaped her left eye, then another. It wasn't the flood of tears her mother shed, it was something deeper. It was the weeping of a soul that had been locked away for a very, very long time. I knew we were at a critical juncture. This is the moment in a confrontation where a person either breaks through or doubles down. They either step into the light or retreat further into the darkness. Everything I had done up to this point, challenging her, confronting her parents, explaining the psychology of her self-destruction, was about creating a space safe enough for the truth to land. She had to believe in her gut that telling the secret would be less painful than continuing to carry it. Jenna, I said, leaning in, my voice just above a whisper, but firm enough to cut through the noise in her head, I am going to ask you one more time, what happened in February of your freshman year? I know the date. I've done my homework. Your grades were perfect up until the second week of February, and then you never attended another class. Something happened on that campus that changed the entire trajectory of your life. It's the monster in your closet, and it's time to turn on the light. Because I promise you, the monster you've imagined in your head is 1,000 times worse than the one that's actually there. She was sobbing now, deep, shuddering gasps that shook her entire body. It was the sound of a pain so profound it had been voiceless for years. Her mother, Susan, made a move to get up, to go to her, but I held up a hand. Stay there, Susan. This is her fight. She has to do this herself. Susan sank back into the couch, her own tears flowing freely, but she understood. This wasn't about comforting the addict. It was about empowering the survivor. Jenna looked up, her eyes locking with mine. The defiance was gone. The hardness was gone. All that was left was a terrified 19-year-old girl. He told me not to tell anyone, she whispered. Her voice so quiet the studio audience barely heard it. He who? Jenna? I pressed gently. Who told you not to tell? My professor, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. My creative writing professor, everyone loved him. He was the campus star. He took a special interest in my work. The air went out of the room. I could feel it. A collective gasp. Her parents looked at each other, stunned, their faces a canvas of horror and disbelief. The narrative they had constructed, the bad boyfriend, the party scene shattered in an instant. This was a monster they had never imagined. He told me I was gifted, Jenna continued. The story tumbling out now that the first stone had been moved. He said, I had a unique voice. He would ask me to stay after class to discuss my essays. It felt good to be seen. My dad was always focused on my grades in science, my sports, business school. But this professor, he saw me. I nodded slowly. He was grooming you. It's a classic pattern. He isolated you with praise, made you feel special, made you feel like you had a secret, special connection that no one else could possibly understand. Yes, she choked out. We'd meet for coffee to talk about my stories. Then one night, he invited me to his office. He said he had some notes on my manuscript. He poured some wine. I didn't think. I trusted him. He was my professor. And then he. She couldn't finish the sentence. She just buried her face in her hands, her body convulsing with the memory. She didn't have to finish. We all knew. I let the silence hang there for a moment. It was a silence filled with the weight of the unspeakable. He assaulted you, I said, stating the fact plainly, taking the burden of saying the words off of her. And after he did it, he told you it was your fault. He told you that you led him on. He told you that if you ever told anyone, you would be the one to get in trouble, that you would be expelled, and he would deny everything and everyone would believe him, the celebrated professor, over a freshman girl who was drinking in his office. Am I right? She looked up, her face streaked with tears and makeup, and nodded. He said, I was worthless, that I was trash, and I believed him. And there it was, the source of the shame, the genesis of the self-hatred. It wasn't just the assault, it was the psychological poison he had injected into her veins. He had handed her a script, a story about herself, that she was worthless, dirty, and to blame, and she had accepted it as truth. From that moment on, her life became a mission to prove him right. She started using drugs not just to numb the memory, but to become the worthless person he told her she was. It was a twisted, self-fulfilling prophecy. Every dollar she stole, every lie she told, every time she put a needle in her arm, it was a voice in her head whispering, see, he was right about you. Her addiction wasn't the problem. It was the evidence. The anagnorisis on that stage was one of the most powerful I've ever witnessed. It was like a switch had been flipped, illuminating a room that had been dark for years. For Mark and Susan, their daughter's entire downward spiral was suddenly reframed. It wasn't an act of rebellion against them. It was a symptom of a horrific trauma. The anger on Mark's face dissolved, replaced by a raw, guttural anguish. This wasn't a bad investment. This was his little girl, grievously wounded by a predator he had failed to protect her from. The powerlessness he felt before was nothing compared to the impotent rage that now consumed him. His fight hadn't been with Jenna. His fight was with a ghost, a respected professor who had violated his child and then vanished from the narrative. Susan's guilt also transformed her self-blame. Where did I go wrong? Shifted to a profound maternal sorrow. She wasn't a bad mother. She was the mother of a victim who had been suffering in silence, carrying a burden too heavy for any child to bear alone. The walls of anger and misunderstanding that had turned their home into a war zone crumbled in an instant. They weren't looking at an addict anymore. They were looking at their daughter, truly seeing her for the first time since she'd left for college. I turned to them. Mark, Susan, do you understand now? Every single bad behavior you have been fighting against, the lying, the stealing, the drug use, was her screaming for help in the only language she had left. She was living out the shame she felt she deserved. She was trying to destroy the person who was assaulted because she couldn't live with the memory. You thought you were fighting a drug problem. You were not. You were fighting a trauma response. Mark could barely speak. He looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with a pain that I knew would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jenna, I'm so sorry, he stammered. I had no idea. I was so hard on you. I thought, God, I'm so sorry. It was more than an apology. It was a confession of his blindness, of his ego, of his failure to see past the behavior to the pain. That was the breakthrough, not just for Jenna, but for the entire family system. The secret was out, and its power was diminished. Shame cannot survive in the light of empathy. The truth, as devastating as it was, had lanced the boil. For the first time, they were all on the same side, facing the same enemy. And the enemy was not Jenna. It was not her addiction. The enemy was the trauma and the secret that had fed it. Of course, the journey was far from over. This was the beginning, not the end. The revelation on my stage was the turning point. The moment the war was declared on the right enemy, but the battles were still to come. I looked at Jenna. The relief on her face was immense, but it was mingled with a new kind of fear. The fear of what comes next. Now that she no longer had to hide, she had to learn how to live. Jenna, what you did here today took a level of courage that you probably didn't even know you had. I told her directly, you spoke the truth. You took the power back from the man who hurt you and from the secret that has been holding you hostage, but now the real work begins. The drugs were a coping mechanism, a terrible one, but they served a purpose. They helped you survive. We have to find a new way for you to cope, a healthy way. I explained that recovery for her was not going to be a standard 30-day program focused solely on sobriety. She needed specialized, trauma-informed care. She needed to be in a place where therapists understood the intricate link between her substance abuse and the sexual assault. She needed to learn that the flashbacks, the anxiety, the depression, these were not signs of her being crazy, but normal, predictable responses to an abnormal event. She had to untangle her identity from the identity of a victim. She had to mourn the girl she was before the assault and learn to build a new life, a new sense of self from the rubble. This is where so many recovery efforts fail. They focus on the what, the drinking, the drugging, without ever getting to the why. It's like putting a fresh coat of paint on a house with a rotten foundation. It might look good for a little while, but eventually the whole thing is going to collapse. For Jenna, her foundation had been shattered. We couldn't just tell her to stop using drugs. We had to help her rebuild that foundation piece by piece. It would be a long, painful process involving intensive therapy, both individual and group, where she could connect with other survivors and realize she was not alone. It would involve her parents getting their own counseling, learning how to support her without enabling her, learning to manage their own anger and grief so they could be a source of strength for her, not another source of stress. I laid out the plan. A top-tier residential treatment facility that specialized in co-occurring disorders, trauma, and addiction. I had already spoken to them, and they were ready to admit her directly from the show. This wasn't an ultimatum. It was a lifeline. It was a clear, structured path out of the hell she had been living in. The choice, as always, was hers. But this time, it was a real choice. Before, she was choosing between the secret and the drugs. Now, she was choosing between the past and a possible future. And she chose the future. There was no hesitation. In that moment, watching her agree to go to treatment, I saw a flicker of the girl from the old photographs, the determined athlete, the focused student. The core of who she was hadn't been destroyed by the trauma or the addiction. It had just been buried. Our job, the work she was about to begin, was an archaeological dig of the self. We had to carefully brush away the layers of shame, guilt, and self-hatred to uncover the person who was still intact underneath. The outcome for someone like Jenna is never a simple Hollywood ending where she walks out of rehab and everything is perfect. Life isn't a movie. Recovery is a messy, nonlinear process. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. The initial months were incredibly difficult. Detox is a physical hell, but what came after was a psychological war. Without the drugs to numb her, she had to face the memories and the feelings head on for the first time. There were days she wanted to run, days she called her parents, screaming, crying, begging to come home, convinced she couldn't do it. And this is where the parents' own recovery became crucial. The old Susan would have caved. She would have heard her daughter's pain and, driven by her own guilt, would have driven to the facility to rescue her. The old Mark would have gotten angry, telling her to tough it out, further alienating her. But they were in their own therapy now, learning a new dance. They learned to listen, to validate her pain. I hear how much you're hurting, and I can only imagine how hard this is while still holding the boundary. But we believe in you, and we know you have to stay and do the work. We are not bringing you home to the environment that was killing you. That was the essence of true tough love. It wasn't about punishment. It was about holding a boundary out of love, not anger. It was about believing in her recovery more than she did, especially on the days she didn't believe in it at all. For Jenna, the group therapy sessions were transformative. For the first time, she was in a room with other women who had similar stories. Women who had also been told they were worthless, who had also turned to substances to silence the shame. In their stories, she heard her own. In their tears, she saw her own. The profound isolation that had been her prison for years began to dissolve. She wasn't a freak. She wasn't uniquely broken. She was a survivor. Saying the words, "I am a survivor," instead of "I am an addict," was a monumental shift in her identity. One is a life sentence. The other is a testament to strength. She did the hard work. She wrote letters to her younger self, forgiving her for not fighting back, for believing the lies. She learned about trauma triggers and developed healthy coping mechanisms, exercise, meditation, art therapy. She learned to sit with uncomfortable feelings without immediately reaching for something to numb them. It was excruciating. But with each day she got through, she was building a new muscle of resilience. She was proving to herself, moment by moment, that she could survive the pain. That was something the drugs had never allowed her to learn. After 90 days in residential treatment, she transitioned to a step-down program with sober living. This was another critical phase. It's one thing to be sober in the bubble of a treatment center. It's another thing entirely to navigate the real world. She got a simple job at a coffee shop. She made new friends, sober friends. She went to meetings. Her relationship with her parents continued to heal slowly. They had family therapy sessions via video call. They learned to talk to each other, not at each other. They learned to apologize and to forgive. They were rebuilding their family on a new foundation, one built on honesty and mutual respect, not on expectations and secrets. The legal aspect was something we also addressed. With the help of the treatment center, she made the decision to report her professor to the university. It was a terrifying step, but a necessary one for her to fully reclaim her power. It turned out she wasn't the first. Her voice, added to the whispers of others, created a chorus the university could no longer ignore. He was eventually fired. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring he couldn't do to another young, bright-eyed freshman what he had done to her. It was about turning her pain into protection for others. I checked in with the family about a year after their appearance on the show. The Jenna I spoke to on the phone was a different human being. Her voice was clear and confident. She was back in school at a local community college, studying to be a victim's advocate. She wanted to use her experience to help others. She still had bad days. She still had moments of anxiety. Recovery hadn't cured her. It had given her the tools to manage her life. She told me, "You know, Doctor, Phil, for years I thought the secret was the thing that was keeping me safe. But it was the cage. The truth didn't kill me. It set me free." And that's the whole point. We all have secrets. We all have shame. We build these fortresses around our pain, thinking we're protecting ourselves when all we're really doing is locking ourselves in. Jenna's story is a dramatic example, but the principle is universal. The only way out is through. You have to be willing to face the truth, to speak it out loud, and to do the hard work of healing. She didn't just get sober, she got her life back. She got herself back, and you can't put a price on that.